And welcome back to The Count. We are counting down the major stories of the week. I'm Heather Childers along with Rob Finnerty, and we're moving in on story number 3 of our countdown. What would Trump do? Just imagine, if you will, if Donald Trump had actually won the 2020 presidential election. What would Trump's first 100 days in office look like compared to Biden's? Joining us now to discuss is political strategist and author of The End of Democracy, Doug Schoen, and former deputy director of the National Republican Congressional Committee, Mark Pischea. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mark, we'll start with you. How different would these 100 days be, or would they?
Oh, they'd be a lot different. And clearly, coronavirus is the number one issue and would be addressed by, President Trump. But we would have seen more of a continuation of existing policies, continuing to enact the things that President Trump prioritized during his 4 years. What we would not see is 45 executive orders unilaterally trying to govern this country and carving Congress out of the picture. Whether the president is Republican or Democrat, that is a bad precedent for our country. Congress is the governing body closest to the people, and it needs to be involved in these decisions. And if they aren't, we're just going to have this ping pong policy that Father Frank mentioned applied to all sorts of issues.
Doug, we haven't seen 40 executive orders signed since the days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he signed over 3,000 throughout his time in the Oval Office. Dictators sign orders like that, not Democratic presidents.
Well, I don't think Joe Biden is a dictator. I think he's the opposite of that. He's committed himself to promoting democracy and democratic values around the world, and I'm very pleased he's done that, as I tried to describe in my book, The End of Democracy. But on your more general question, I don't think President Trump was allergic to executive orders. Also, I believe legislatively, President Trump was committed to $2,000 stimulus checks for all, and that seems to be the direction Biden is heading in, though his checks are $1,400. So I'm not so sure that things are that different. I wish they were. I wish we were governing legislatively, and I wish that we were putting aside the extreme policies of the left and the right, but sadly our country is really hopelessly divided.
You know, Doug, President Trump did work with Congress, and he was able to sign, I think it was 28 bills into law working together in his first 100 days. Do you think that President Biden has undertook these swift executive orders because he knows that he can't work with Congress when he's going for these far-left, agenda-driven policies or orders?
Well, I'm not sure they're all far left, Heather, but I would say this. I am disappointed that the president has not sought to engage Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership in the House more aggressively to pass a bipartisan agenda. I hope on things like infrastructure, the president does that. I was disappointed with the executive order on the Keystone Pipeline and the seeming intransigence on fossil fuels. Let's hope that we do get a gang of 16 or something like that to work through a stimulus that is targeted to those most in need, and that legislative policies going forward take precedence over these executive orders.
If Trump were in office right now, Mark, he would likely still be dealing with this same impeachment situation. But maybe had he won, we'd look at history a little bit differently. The riots at the Capitol wouldn't have happened 3.5 weeks ago. But do you think this impeachment, which is going to move forward a week from now, do you think it's going to end up doing the opposite, having the opposite effect, and actually generating a whole lot of sympathy and support for President Trump?
I do. What fair or not, I do. Actions have consequences, and for all the talk from the Biden administration about bipartisan cooperation, and I'm not saying that the Trump administration was ever better at it, but they didn't make it a pillar of their campaigns either. So what you have now is basically Biden granting every campaign promise he made through executive order, and it makes those policies also vulnerable to overturning, in the next Congress or the next administration. But I agree that energy, is an area where there's lots of room for bipartisan cooperation, and to me, executive orders are an example of laziness and arrogance.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Mark, and Doug, I'd like you to respond to that because,
Sure.
When President Trump took office 4 years ago, even before he took office, he had people talking about impeachment. He spent 4 years, everyone talking about impeachment and talking about Russia and Russia interfering in the investigation or the election. And then you have him leaving office and impeachment happening all over again. He's not even in office anymore, and impeachment is still happening.
Well, let's just say he was impeached because he encouraged a series of events at the Capitol that tragically led to 5 people dying that did not have to die. I'm one of those who does feel we would do much better with a quick censure resolution against the former president and moving on. I don't think we need a 1 or 2 week trial.
Yeah.
I'd much prefer to concentrate on bipartisan substantive legislative initiatives going forward. But Heather, you just can't let what the president sadly encouraged at the Capitol go undocumented and unaccounted for. Sadly, I wish it didn't happen,
Doug,
and I hope we resolve it
Doug,
quickly.
you've been in politics a long time.
I sure have.
And I've covered administrations since 1996. And we all know that some of the rhetoric that President Trump is being accused of using that is now being said to have caused violent riots, this is the same rhetoric that Democrats and Republicans have used throughout centuries.
Well, I don't accept that premise, Heather. I don't believe that Democrats or Republicans have encouraged the kind of anti-systemic violence that we saw at the Capitol.
Well, hold on, Doug, just quickly, because we're super tight on time, and I don't want to look at it from a macro perspective. I think what Heather's saying is, how can you incite something if it was already planned? We've got a labyrinth of evidence right now that suggests that this was pre-planned.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly encouraged it and didn't tell people to back off. I wish he had.
All right. Well, he did tell people to go home in peace. I think that was a quote, but you can't find it because he's been banned from social media. But I promise you that's what he said. Doug Schoen and Mark
Too little,
Pischea.
too late, Heather.
Right. Thank you both for joining us on this Saturday night. We appreciate it.
Thank you.